Hey everybody, how's it going? Today I'm coming at you from our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I'm a little bit behind my upload schedule, wanted to be on, but vacation will do that to you, I guess. The stats on the podcast are still super strong. Thank you so much. We're averaging about 600 to 700 downloads per day, and over the past month we've had well over 2,000 unique listeners, so I cannot thank you guys enough for listening. I've been getting tons and tons of encouraging messages on Facebook and Instagram, and it seems like a lot of people are really enjoying the podcast, and that's been super motivating. So this is the weekly update. In this episode, I'm going to rant a little bit on some of my thoughts, share some of my other favorite podcasts that I've been listening to, and answer some questions that I've been getting and give you a preview of this week's episodes. It's pretty funny because I've been reaching out to other podcasters and getting connected with some other people in the space, and tons of people have been commenting on my audio quality. I didn't really think that was going to be that big of a deal until I started listening to some other podcasts that were just getting started, and I'm not trying to be mean, but most of them just aren't up to my standards, and it really doesn't take much to have professional sounding audio. My entire setup, excluding my computer and the editing software I use, is only about $260, and there's definitely a bell curve to how much the equipment costs versus how much better your audio is going to sound. But my lavalier mics that I use cost about $40 each. Those are going to sound a lot better than the microphones that come on your phone. But you could still get really good, crisp audio on your phone because most people just aren't recording in the right environment. I think that's the biggest key. If you watch my Snapchat story right now, or rather my Instagram story right now, on the podcast Instagram, I show that I am literally in a pillow fort right now recording this because I'm in my hotel room. There's not very good audio. I've got tons of AC noise in the background, and the housekeeping's walking by and all this kind of stuff. So there's tons of background noise. So I'm trying to isolate myself from that as much as possible. And if you change the environment, you could take your recording from like a 3 to a 7. If you're recording in a super echoey environment, or like I said, there's tons of AC or background noise, it can be really challenging to get listenable audio quality. And if people only had to listen to it for a few minutes, it'd be fine. But these people are going to be listening to your podcast for literally hours at a time. So you've really got to figure out how to make your audio sound as good as possible. I'm trying to get in the new and noteworthy section in iTunes. And I know that if Apple is going to feature my podcast, it's going to also have to be up to their standards as well. So I'm really trying to get this audio quality as good as I can get with the equipment that I have and what I have to deal with here. But yeah, that's pretty much my deal right now, is I'm trying to just put out as good quality of content as I possibly can. Speaking of featuring podcasts, like I said, Apple features certain podcasts on their platform, and I wanted to take the time to share 2 podcasts that I've listened to this week that I think you guys would actually really enjoy as well if you enjoy my content here. I have no affiliation with these podcasts at all. I wish I did. They're great podcasts. But I think the weekly update would be kind of a cool place to share some podcasts that I listen to, because that's where I get a lot of my stuff from. So the first podcast that I highly recommend this week is the Joe Rogan Experience, and that would be episode number 974. Yes, you heard that right. 974 episodes. This man is a machine. But that is with Megan Phelps Roper. And Megan used to be a prominent member of the radical religious cult, the Westboro Baptist Church. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Westboro Baptist Church, they're especially known for their hate speech towards the LGBT community, Catholics, Muslims, Jews, and basically everyone else on earth. And their church website is actually godhatesfags.com. And they've made crazy statements such as, thank God for dead soldiers, God blew up the troops, thank God for 9/11, God hates America, and of course, God hates fags, all kinds of stuff like that. And they tend to picket soldiers' funerals, religious gatherings, gay pride rallies, and stuff like that. And Megan left the church a few years ago, and in this amazing interview, she gives a surprising inside look on what goes on inside the church and how talking with people on Twitter actually helped her realize the errors in the church doctrine and why she no longer is affiliated with them and how she escaped the church. And it's actually been one of my favorite episodes of that podcast I've listened to in a while, and you definitely don't want to miss out on that one. Again, that was episode 974 of the Joe Rogan Experience. The other podcast I would recommend this week is Control Walt Delete with legendary tech reporter Walt Mossberg and the editor-in-chief of TheVerge.com, Nilay Patel. And this episode is called Walt and Nilay Sign Off, and that is because it's actually the final episode of Control Walt Delete. They've been going strong for about 2 years. They have 75 episodes, and if you like that final episode, you can go back and listen to the others, obviously, but this is the final episode. It's totally done. And Walt Mossberg was personal friends with like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, tons of other billionaire tech entrepreneurs, and he has some amazing stories about those guys. So if you want to hear some really nerdy stuff, that final episode was recorded in front of a live audience in New York City, and they had a live Q&A at the end. So if you're a tech nerd like me, you'll really enjoy that podcast too. Okay, so now I'm going to take the time to answer a few questions that I've been getting. Some people, some people, mainly my parents and their friends that want to listen to my podcast, have been commenting on the use of my quote-unquote inappropriate language. This is going to be a fun one. And I thought I would address that. Basically, I have a very reasonable explanation for why I choose to swear on this podcast, and I also think that it's pretty logical. Number one, I don't want to filter myself in any way. I want to be as transparent and open as possible. I have no interest in censoring myself. Transparency is a huge, huge, huge driving factor behind this podcast, and I think that being as open with my audience as I possibly can allows for, number one, vulnerability, and vulnerability is the only way that you can actually build trust, right? Because if you put yourself out there, people are going to latch on and say, wow, he put himself on a limb, and I respect that. Number two, I don't want to filter my guests either. And I want my guests to feel as comfortable as possible. I don't want them to change or filter their responses just because lots of people are listening. And I also think it would be silly for me to censor myself, but then also allow my guests to curse. And by allowing myself the freedom to curse, it lets my guests know that they can be free to express themselves however they want to as well. And of course, there's going to be some guests who I know they don't swear out of personal convictions or whatever. So you'll probably not find me swearing on those episodes. But yeah, that's pretty much that. Number three, I think that I owe my listeners my real thoughts and feelings. And some people have commented that they think that my cussing seems kind of forced, especially in the first few episodes. And I think that is probably because in the back of my mind, there's a slight hesitation before I do it. And since this is being put out there for everyone to hear, there's a little voice in the back of my head telling me, don't say it, change the word. But like I said, I have made the decision not to filter myself. So I say it anyways, even if there is a slight hesitation, even if it comes out a little awkward, because pretending that I don't swear in real life is just as preposterous, and putting on a filter to separate myself from the virgin ears of the listeners seems disingenuous, and it seems like I'm, babying you that you can't hear my foul language. So over the course of this podcast, I think it will become more natural, and not that I'm trying to swear more, but I think that swearing has its time and place. And the last point I want to make about this is definitely that times are changing. The line between being professional and unprofessional is definitely blurring every day. We can't stop pretending that we're living these double lives. At work, I'm going to talk like this, and at home, I'm going to talk like this. At work, oh, hi, Sharon. Did you receive those files that I sent to you last week? I really think we're going to hit our numbers for this quarter. So that'll be a real big win for the team, Like no one talks like that. No, I don't want to have this weird radio voice that I only use when I know someone's listening. It's fake and it's gross and everyone can tell it's weird. Throwing in a curse word lets people know that you're not taking things too seriously and that you're comfortable. And the more we police language, the more power you give to those words. The more we use those taboo words, the quicker they're going to lose their power. So if they're such bad words, wouldn't we want them to lose their power? Isn't that what we want? Like, if these words are so bad, shouldn't we use them more so they literally just mean less? I don't know. I think so. But having curse words in are an automatic filter for those who are not open-minded enough to look past them. And if my cursing truly offends you, then maybe you shouldn't be listening to my podcast at all. And if you're still listening at this point, then I think you will be completely fine. Whoa, that was a long question. Second question is something that I've been wrestling with, and I was recently contacted by an Olympic gold medalist who lives in New York. And I really want to have her on my podcast. The problem is that she lives in New York. And eventually I want to use this podcast as a way to travel and see the world. So I'd love to be able to fly up there, stay in a hotel, do a podcast real fast, fly back, see New York for a little bit. But right now with my work schedule, it's just not really a reality. So the question is, am I going to do virtual podcasts when I am not in the same physical space as my guests? I'm torn because I really want to have her and other people that are interesting on the podcast, but I hate virtual interviews. They're just not as intimate. There's a weird disconnect you get when you're not in the same room. The other problem is the audio quality. Like I mentioned earlier, I really want to make sure my audio quality is top notch, and usually Skype interviews, they sound like they were recorded with a toaster oven. Like the audio is delayed. It's just a big pet peeve of mine. When I'm listening to a really long podcast and the audio is delayed, it's grainy, it's just not fun. And on the other hand, I could totally do the interview, deliver the content to you guys, and do my best to clean it up and just get over myself. But I'm looking into some software that's designed specifically for this type of scenario, but I'm still very wary of the quality. Do me a favor. Let me know what you guys think. Should I start doing virtual conversations, or should I just stick with face-to-face and not settle for subpar quality? Okay, those two questions were doozies, and I really didn't answer the second one. But I'm about to just move on because let's talk about this week's episodes. So this week I have 3 new episodes for your ear holes. Episode 18 is with my friend Luke Crawford. Luke is a Renaissance man. He does everything. He's an entrepreneur. He's a photographer. He's a competitive shooter. He's a hunter. He's a fighter. He's a political activist. He's a fellow Eagle Scout, and much, much more, ladies and gentlemen. I've been friends with Luke for over 15 years or so, and we had a lot to talk about. Luke has always had a way of standing out from the crowd, and not just because he's taller than everyone, but since high school he's been on the news, he's been on the radio, he's gained a sizable following on Instagram and Facebook, and in this episode, Luke shared some amazing stories of how he got into the world of firearms, the famous story of how he got on the news for his unique business idea in high school, his huge recent win with Students for Concealed Carry, how he outsmarted Donald Trump's campaign and beat them to the punch on a great business idea, and his activism with fighting human trafficking and the sex industry in Atlanta. Yeah, we covered a lot, but I've wanted to have Luke on my podcast since I started this thing, and I really enjoyed catching up with him, and I'm sure this is going to be one of those classic episodes. I cannot wait to have him on again, because there's a lot more things we could talk about. Episode 19 is with celebrity stylist and fashion expert Cameron Hesseltine. Cameron has styled a whole bunch of celebrities, including John Hamm, Kate Beckinsale, Chrissy Teigen, and Sarah Hyland. And in this episode, Cameron shared her story of her upbringing and why she dropped out of college, her crazy stories of styling celebrities in LA, and why it's not as glamorous as it seems. And we talked men's fashion, the taboos surrounding it, and we gave some do's and don'ts for the guys out there. I have been getting more and more into men's fashion over the past year, and it was really fun to talk to her about all that stuff surrounding men's fashion. And Cameron is going to be starting her own podcast very soon, so stay tuned for that. I can't wait to be on a guest on her show, and I will let all of you guys know when she officially launches that. Episode 20 is with my friend Lindsay Carino. Lindsay is a world traveler, political activist, historian, and she is one of my best friends, and she actually lives here in Washington, D.C. I've been waiting to release this week's update because I knew we were doing this podcast, and I wanted to at least release 3 episodes this week. Lindsay moved here 6 months ago and didn't know a single person, just straight hustled from the ground up, found an apartment on Craigslist, and now she is killing it. It's been her dream to move out here, and I'm super proud of her for conquering her fears and just going for it. And on this episode, Lindsay shares her stories from her childhood and growing up in England, the stories of the impact her dad has made on her life and his tragic death last year. And at the end, we delved into some good old American politics. And I was super excited to come visit her and record this podcast. And I really want to thank Lindsay for being so vulnerable and sharing her stories with us. Obviously, talking about death and difficult subjects like that are never fun. And I really, really want to thank Lindsay for talking about that and sharing that, because I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value from it. You know, Lindsay's a really strong woman, and I really just want to thank her for being so vulnerable on the podcast. And you definitely don't want to miss that one. It was really fun. And yeah, those 3 episodes will be coming very soon, so stay tuned. If you want to support the podcast, best way to do that is to go to iTunes or the podcast app. If you have an iPhone, find my podcast, leave it a 5-star review, and give me some feedback in there. I would love to know what you like, what you don't like. And I'm trying to make it in that new and noteworthy section, so giving me as many downloads as possible is very, very helpful. If you want to follow me on social media, the best way to find me is to go to my website, andrewdeitsch.com. That's Andrew, DEITSCH.com. You can find links to all my social media handles and accounts. Make sure you especially follow the podcast on Instagram. It's at AD Podcast. Lots of cool content being put out there. That is all I have time for, ladies and gentlemen. I'm flying back to Atlanta today, so I'm going to be recording a lot more episodes when I get back. Super excited. Got a lot of good episodes coming down the pipes. But I'm going to go. Thanks for listening, supporting the podcast. I really, really do appreciate it. You guys are the reason why I'm still making these things, man. Episode 18 with Luke Crawford is coming up next, so stay tuned. Bye, everybody.